All right, we're jumping right into something huge today. The water crisis hitting American agriculture, a crisis that's being driven by our changing climate. And listen, that's not some kind of hyperbole. Experts are literally calling the water shortage the single greatest threat. This isn't a problem for the future, it's happening right now, and it's threatening the very foundation of how we grow our food. So let's get our heads around this. You might see pictures of cracked, dry earth out in the American West and think, well, that's a regional problem, but it's really not. A massive amount of the fruits, vegetables, and nuts for the entire country comes from these exact places, so their problem is absolutely on its way to everyone's dinner table. And we're not just talking about a dry summer here. This is something else entirely. Scientists have a name for it, a mega drought. And to give you some perspective, the drought happening right now in the Southwest is one of the worst in the last 1,200 years. Just wrap your head around that for a second. Over a millennium of recorded history, and this is one of the worst it's ever been. It's just staggering. So you gotta ask, right? What in the world is driving a drought on this epic of a scale? Well, all the evidence points in one clear direction. This breaks it down perfectly. It's basically a brutal 1-2 punch. First, you get these record-breaking high temperatures that just bake the landscape, sucking moisture out of the soil. And at the same time, you're getting less rain, and this is the real kicker, less snow up in the mountains. That snowpack is like the West's giant natural water tower. It's supposed to melt in the spring and refill all the rivers and reservoirs. But right now, it's just not getting refilled. And the result of all that? Well, you can see it right here. This isn't just a few dry spots on a map. By mid-2022, almost 2/3 of the entire Western U.S. was in a state of drought. Look at that. Over half the region was in severe drought, with another chunk in extreme drought. It's a full-blown crisis across a huge area. Now, to really understand what this water loss looks like, let's look at the most famous reservoir in the country, Lake Mead. This is what it looked like just over 2 decades ago. Nearly full, a vast, reliable source of water for millions. And then this. By 2022, it had dropped to just 27% of its capacity. Let that number really sink in. That isn't just a low watermark, that's an alarm bell screaming that the water supply for 40 million people and vast stretches of farmland is in serious, serious trouble. Okay, so we've seen the cause, we've seen the scale, but what does this actually feel like for the people on the front lines? Let's turn to the farmers. It's a pretty simple equation. No water, no farming. And the numbers back it up. In 2022, the amount of irrigated cropland in the U.S. hit a 30-year low. 30 years! That means millions of acres that could be growing food were just sitting empty because the water wasn't there. And behind that giant statistic are real people making these gut-wrenching decisions. Take this melon farmer in California. He had to let a third of his farm go unplanted, not because there was no demand for his melons, but because he literally couldn't be sure he'd get enough water to grow them. Can you imagine that kind of uncertainty? And that decision he made, it has a name. It's called fallowing. And when you see it from space, the picture is just wild. It's this patchwork quilt of vibrant green fields right next to these brown, dusty, idle squares of dirt. That's the drought, visible from orbit. You know, a problem this big doesn't just stay on the farm. It creates this massive economic shockwave that ripples outwards. So let's follow the money. First, the direct hit. In California, in just one bad drought year, farmers lost over $1 billion in revenue from crops that were never even grown. That's income that supports families and entire towns just gone. And of course, when fields go unplanted, the jobs disappear too. We're talking about nearly 9,000 farm workers, harvesters, packers, field hands, who were suddenly out of work. But it doesn't stop there, right? Think of the truck drivers who haul produce, the people in processing plants, the companies that sell equipment. When you factor in all those ripple effects, the total economic damage skyrockets to $1.7 billion. And that translates into this: a loss of nearly 15,000 jobs across the whole economy of the region. This is the kind of thing that hollows out rural communities that depend entirely on agriculture. And this quote just brings it all home. These aren't just numbers on a page. These are farm owners having to look their employees, people they've known and worked with for years, in the eye and tell them there's no more work. It's devastating. So, the economic pain is obvious.
But there's another crisis unfolding here, one that's a lot harder to see, happening right beneath our feet.
Now get ready for this, because this statistic is incredible. With rivers and reservoirs drying up, people have been forced to pump massive amounts of water from underground aquifers. They've pumped so much that in just 20 years, the region has lost an amount of groundwater equal to draining Lake Mead completely twice. And that water isn't coming back in our lifetime, it's gone. And all that overpumping kicks off this awful chain reaction of other disasters. The ground itself literally starts to sink. Drinking water wells fail. Rivers run so low that fish and wildlife can't survive. Those dry, fallowed fields kick up enormous dust storms that ruin air quality. And of course, all this dry vegetation just turns the landscape into a tinderbox, ready for the next monster wildfire. So after all of that pretty bleak news, you have to wonder, is there a way out of this? Is there any relief on the horizon? Well, the consensus from the experts is pretty sobering. A single wet winter, which is great, don't get me wrong, it helps, but it's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon. The water deficit is now so deep that it would take years, multiple back-to-back years of above-average rain and snow just to get back to what we used to think of as normal. And that leaves us with the final, crucial question that affects every single one of us. This isn't just a story about the West. It's a story about our food system. As America's food basket gets hotter and drier, what does that mean for the food on your plate, for the prices you pay at the grocery store? That's the question we all need to be asking.